At last year's launch of the Inter-American Week for People of African Descent in the Americas, we talked about the need to educate and reform. That was the theme for last year. That message bears repetition, and the Secretary General just spoke of that. For it is only when we educate that we can transform, and it is only when we transform that emancipation from mental slavery will occur, the global freedom that we yearn for. So the essence of what is needed is education, not ignorance. Education is needed in order to bring about awareness and to remove the stigmas that still linger from the enslavement of Africans. I'm going to get a little personal. Several months ago, I went on an errand to a supermarket. I used the crosswalk in the parking lot of the shopping center to make my way to the front door of the supermarket. While I was walking on the crosswalk, a vehicle approached me at high speed. Even though I was visible, the driver didn't stop. Instead, the driver swerved around me. It was nerve-wracking. I went on to do my shopping in the supermarket, and while returning to the car, I saw the same driver walking in my direction. I commented to her that she ought to have stopped at the crossing lest she hurt someone. Perhaps I should have kept my mouth shut. She did not appreciate the rebuke. She became verbally abusive and made menacing gestures towards me. I became irritated. And then she said to me, "Ugly African." Initially, I was astonished. And then, when I got over that emotion, I immediately stopped feeling irritated, and instead, I was saddened. And I pitied her. You see, she was a young black woman. She was no more than 19 or 20 years old. She was black, a few shades lighter in complexion than I am. She's what we would refer to as brown-skinned. I cannot adequately describe in words how saddened that made me feel. It stung. And not because I care what anybody, least of all a stranger, thinks about my aesthetics, but I was saddened because she used the word African as a pejorative. She practically spat the word out. It was her intention to offend me, but instead she earned my pity. For she too is an African, and apparently she did not realize that. We are both alike, Afro-descendants. It seems to me that that did not occur to her. Perhaps she has dissociated herself from her place of ancestry. To borrow words from another unforgettable song from the icon Bob Marley, if you don't know your history, then you don't know where you're coming from. Unfortunately, one of the legacies of slavery is a skewed notion of beauty, with the scales being weightier the lighter the complexion. That is known as colorism. This is a direct result of slavery, in which the house slaves with lighter skin, they were ranked higher than the field slaves with darker skin tones. I cannot speak for other parts of the hemisphere, but I am sure those of us from the Caribbean would have heard one time or another statements like, "She's a pretty girl, but she's dark." There's the "but," that's a verbal eraser. Or a comment like, "We have to raise our skin color, the family has to raise our color." The intergenerational toxic legacy of slavery, which manifests in all forms of societal biases, will thrive and perpetuate only if we, the current generations, pass it to the generations that come after us. I invite you to stop for a moment and think of what you can do to uproot and put an end to such biases. I have never stopped thinking of this young lady. And I have never stopped wondering how many there are like her. Tender in years, but they have already formulated notions of bias that has been taught to them by society, by us. So, the legacy of slavery and its impact on the human psyche is not to be found just in biases towards Afro-descendants by others, but it also extends on how we as Afro-descendants see ourselves, how we identify ourselves. And sometimes, the worst injury of all is the self-inflicted wound. In his remarks last year to inaugurate the Inter-American Week, ASG Mendez said, and I quote, "Let us not forget where education begins. The seeds that are sown in the mind of a child, and the seeds that are sown in the mind of a child germinate and flourish into the adult of tomorrow. We have a collective responsibility to nurture those minds with principles of equality, equity, and respect for all human beings," unquote. A well-known African proverb says, "It takes a village to raise a child." It is my hope that villages everywhere will raise children imbued with those values of which the ASG spoke, so that redemption of humanity could finally come.